Today, we're going to talk about money, and there's a lot to talk about with money.
My grandma, being the godly woman that she was, there was a time where they got down to, it was like a canning jar of rice on the table, and it was a decoration. When it came down to it, she was going to try to feed her 2 kids and herself. And she said that night, she sat my dad down and his sister and just said, we need to pray and ask God to provide. And they prayed and asked the Lord to provide. And the next morning, there were groceries on their doorstep. And they didn't know where they came from.
There's a statement Jesus makes in a parable he tells, which is shocking about money. And it's from Luke 16. And so I want to get into that too. But let's start here. You ready for where we can start?
I'm ready.
You and I are very different when it comes to money.
We are.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Ginger and Jeremy podcast. Glad to be back. Ginge, how you doing?
Great. Doing really well. I just had a little iced coffee. I've been making my own iced coffee at home. I feel like I need to pull this closer. There we go.
A little bit. It's stuck on the... There you go.
That's it. Yeah, I've been making my own iced coffee at home, and it is delicious. And the funny thing is, I always hated on iced coffee. I
know.
drink hot coffee even if it's 100 degrees outside. That's me.
Yeah, me too. I don't understand there's a a cold coffee like phenomenon, but
I know.
I was always hot coffee, but this coffee you've made, Ginge,
Do you like it?
it's remarkable.
I feel like it's kind of healthy too.
So you know how I know the coffee's very good is you're so faithful to make coffee because it's the first thing you need every morning. So you get into it.
I make a hot pot of coffee now, just black coffee.
But then if I'm on the way to taking Felicity to school and I realize I forgot my cup of coffee, the last few days where you've been making this kind of like cold brew, I guess, I've really been like, shoot, I forgot my coffee, like really upset.
I actually made you some this morning. And then as soon as you rushed out the door,
Missed it.
It was sitting there and I was like, bummer, he left his coffee.
It's so good.
It's a great way to start your morning. So yes, I'm doing great. I actually just had a nice coffee and I feel all energized, ready to go.
Today, we're going to talk about money. And there's a lot to talk about with money.
There is.
Because how to spend it, what does the Bible say about money? You know, that's got to be one of the most abused or misunderstood topics in the Bible.
Mm-hmm, for sure. When I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, oh man, this would be such a good topic to discuss on the podcast because I feel like as a Christian, our idea of money can be one that we put in a certain box, depending on how maybe you were raised or the type of teachings that you sat under in the Christian world. Like there's so much that people think. They automatically assume a lot about money. And so I think it's going to be an exciting topic to break down.
It is because money can be seen as a bad thing, which is why you have a lot of Christians talking like they're always putting qualifiers. Like if they buy something nice or if they get a new car, or they're always going, but this was a gift. Or they always have to qualify it in case somebody thinks, did you spend money on that? But then I think a lot of that reaction has come from money is so often abused and it can be a god to people. And so you have a ton of religious leaders. If you want to get more into this, you should, as a listener, you should listen to our episode on Costi Hinn.
Oh, yeah.
Costi Hinn broke down like, okay, that's the abuse side of money. You have guys like Benny Hinn or Joel Osteen who are like using money to get...
For their own gain.
Yeah, for their own gain.
Yeah.
And they're using the Bible, I should say, to get money. And you can do that. Like if you're sneaky and you want to misquote a Bible verse here or there. So there's a lot of confusion about it. And so there's a statement Jesus makes in a parable he tells, which is shocking about money. And it's from Luke 16. And so I want to get into that too. But yeah, great topic to discuss. But let's start here. You ready for where we can start?
I'm ready.
You and I are very different when it comes to money.
We are.
How are we
We're
different?
So different. I feel like we were kind of raised similar when it comes to money and how we use it. And so we were both raised, where we were very frugal. We weren't extravagant spenders when it comes to money. And so, yeah, very similar thought process. thought processes. See, I always
processes.
Did I say that?
I think it's tomato.
Process.
Very different thought processes.
Okay, whatever. Well, here we go.
I would say thought processes, but I don't feel like it's wrong to say thought processes.
Okay, there we go. Well, anyhow, whatever that is, I think that we definitely had a similar upbringing with that. But today, I feel like I still am super frugal. I am so frugal at times, right? And to the point where it kind of gets me into trouble. And I will say that because I have a couple stories to back it up.
Talk about
Should I just jump into a few?
Yeah.
So I remember I was going to go on a trip and I wanted a couple new dresses. And so I went to Ross to get some dresses thinking, oh, this is great. They're going to be quality clothes, quality enough to get by. I think I needed some things that I could like nurse in or whatever. So I was like, I'm going to run to Ross. Well, I don't think I've shopped at Ross since this day because I went and I was in Arkansas, walked in the back of Ben and Jess's church. Actually, rewind. Sorry, I'm not doing very great at telling the story because it's really rough. It was a bad moment. I climbed in Ben and Jess's minivan, climbed in the back, and I thought I heard something rip. I wasn't sure. I had a jacket on at that time. And so I was like, I think I heard a rip. And so sure enough, under the arm of this brand new dress, it ripped. Got this thing from Ross, right? And anyhow, so I was like, it's fine. I go into church. And as soon as I got inside, I was sitting in the second to the last row.
Thankfully.
And I was like, man, it's hot in here. So I took off the sweater and I was sat down for a minute and then it was time for us to sing. So I stand up, start singing. Jessa was sitting down at the other end of the pew and she looked over and saw and she was like, Ginger, sit down. She was like, sit down. I was like, what's wrong? She said, sit down, put your sweater on. So I was like, what's the big deal? She's like, your dress all the way down the back. My dress ripped from the top to the bottom. Oh my word. It was so bad. And it was because the thing was so cheap. It was too cheap. It looks great. It was stylish, had a great style, but it was too cheap. And that thing ripped down the back. So there's a time where being frugal is not okay.
I warned you.
You did warn me, Jeremy. Always warn me. You gotta buy a little more quality. That way it won't rip, it won't tear. It's gonna last you longer. So in the end, if you like it, it's a good style. Buy a classic style. Buy something that's not gonna just be a trend. It's not gonna be a piece that's gonna come and it's gonna go quickly. Buy something quality. And I didn't listen to your advice, and that thing ripped within 2 hours of wearing it. So yeah, I've learned my lesson, I think. So this is like a $16 sweater. Did I get on sale? Yeah, but it was actually a decent brand.
Sure.
So I will buy things on sale because I hate spending money on clothes. I hate spending a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, that's smart because I just saw this statistic the other day that said 70% of high-end goods, like luxury goods, are bought by people who are middle or lower class. And so what that reveals is there's this perception of wealth that people are trying to buy when they spend a ton of money on clothes or whatever. Not to say you can't buy something nice or, that higher end clothes isn't always because it's a higher quality or something. Yeah. But you don't have to spend a ton of money to look sharp, nice. To look nice. Yeah. But you do have to get quality stuff. And I would always say, I was always nervous because I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that stores like Ross, they'll get the brands that send their stuff there have a lower quality in terms of
there's lots of Calvin Klein stuff, but
yeah, but
you
it's
can go to Calvin Klein at the mall or go to Calvin Klein at Ross and it's probably not going to be the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think so.
And I will say I go to TJ Maxx, but I'm still hit or miss with that. I'm not a big fan of that as much. Nordstrom Rack is my place.
What's the other one? The factory, the jacket factory.
What
begins with a B?
Banana Republic?
No, it's like Nordstrom Rack. It's like TJ Maxx. It's
Burlington
Coat Factory. Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of them anymore. Yeah. I was, but I feel like the quality, and the styles, not my thing these days. But I like Nordstrom Rack. I love Carly Jean Los Angeles. Shout out to them. And I like, what other brands do I like? The Bates Sisters Boutique. There's some that are like real great. So I've kind of like leaned in more towards those. Mm-hmm. Amazon, I will get things on Amazon, but I'm still picky when it comes to Amazon because the quality is not consistent because it's a lot of different retailers. Let's take a break from this episode to tell you about Cozy Earth.
Yeah, you might be able to hear little Finnegan making noise in the background. That's because he's not sleeping on Cozy Earth sheets right now.
Not yet.
The other day, I was out of town for a day and came back, and we just got a new bed, which we'll tell you about in a minute. But Ginger had put on Cozy Earth sheets all over it, and I jumped into bed. I think it was like 1 p.m, getting back from the airport, and I did not want to move.
Oh, yeah. I'm telling you, Cozy Earth, their sheets are next level. And Cozy Earth's mission is to transform your 5 to 9, the time that matters the most, into the most comfortable part of your day.
Yeah, luxury should not be out of reach. And let me tell you, Cozy Earth products are luxurious. But if you use code GINGER, JINGER, you'll get 40% off of their website. So you'll get 40% off their best-selling sheets, pajamas, and more. Go to CozyEarth.com. Use code GINGER, JINGER. Trust us, you will not regret it. CozyEarth.com. Use code GINGER.
Yeah, they have a 100-day free trial, so you can try the sheets for 100 days. You will not need 100 days to try it out. You'll need 1 night of good sleep in those Cozy Earth sheets, and you'll know that you love it. So use my code GINGER for 40% off. We want to take a break from this episode to tell you about Brooklyn Bedding. So like Jeremy said, we did get a new bed, and it was much needed. We had a mattress and we needed to upgrade. We switched to a king and it has been amazing. But one of the things I noticed before we switched was I kept getting back pain. This bed we had kept like sagging and sinking in. And I literally was so stiff, I felt like I couldn't even pick up my baby.
Yeah, and Brooklyn Bedding has solved that. We like a firmer bed. So that's what we chose. We upgraded to king.
Let's go.
It's awesome. You should check Ginger's socials and you'll see she put up a reel of switching all that stuff over. But I was amazed. So the mattress comes rolled up and it's actually really like small. And then you open that thing up and it just expands.
It is thick. It is amazing. Yeah. So Brooklyn Bedding has been around for over 25 years and they're known for their top of the line comfort and quality without the luxury price tag.
And here's the thing, they've got something for everyone. So depending on what kind of bed and mattress you like. And here's the good news, for our listeners only, you can get 30% off.
Go to brooklynbedding.com and use my code JJ at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's brooklynbedding.com and use my code JJ for 30% off site-wide. Now back to the episode.
You've got that thriftiness in you. You like to find a good buy.
I love to thrift.
And to be honest, it's a great feeling finding a good deal.
Oh, yeah.
Getting something good for a good price.
I love going to thrift stores. Mm-hmm. It is it's so great. I cannot think about the cleanliness of it. So I have to make sure that something is not like worn and tattered. But if it's not, I'm going to buy that. And I also, now I know to look for better brands and to feel the quality of the fabric and know what's going to be a good purchase. Right. And so I'm all about thrift stores. It's like one of my favorite things to do.
And that's not bad. You want to be resourceful. Like you don't want to be, there are things like if we're looking at our budget, there are things that will, it's like death by 1,000 pokes. If you look at your budget and realize like, okay, it's 60% more to go and eat out than it is to make food at home, typically, although the grocery store prices are shooting up. But there are things that you've got to be careful on. And clothes is one of those where you can spend a ton of money real fast on clothes if you're not careful, if you're not wise. So thinking about like this idea of being a good steward with your money and all that, but we definitely have different tendencies. Like I am less aware and I have more of a tendency to say, oh no, it's a special moment, let's buy it. Or, oh, that's a good piece, let's spend a few more dollars. Whereas your default is to go the opposite way, which I think can be a good combination for us.
Yeah, I think it's a good balance because I have to be willing to spend where we need to spend. And I'm very hesitant to spend any money on anything.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like, oh, well, we can go spend money on a vacation, which we're not even like big vacationers. We're kind of like, oh, let's take a weekend and drive and maybe we'll go to the beach all day and then we'll eat out and do something like that. So we're not even like, I don't know, we're not big into spending money on trips and things like that. And so, but here and there, it's like you push me to think well about money and enjoying those moments, making special memories for our kids, because I'll be like, how much is that? We can't spend money on that. And then you're like, babe, just enjoy the memory.
Sure.
Like let's make a family memory right now. And you remind me of that, bringing it down to like, okay, we have money for a reason to allot it for our kids to like, let them enjoy this moment. Let's take them to Magic Mountain. Let's take them to, wherever it is that we're going to go. And let's buy them that ice cream cone, even though it's expensive, because I'm all about like, we love, this is one thing that we do have in common. We love a McDonald's cone. And so we are going to go get that. Like,
well, the other day we were out with John and Abby and we went to a place around here, Handles, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And I had Evie and Felicity. And I went to order, and I ordered 2 like regular cones, one for Evie, or one for Felicity, and one for Evie, but they only brought one. And then they brought like this little vanilla ice cream cone. And I'm like, oh, I didn't order that. I ordered, where's my other? And they went, oh, this is the free baby cone. And it was for Evie because she's 4. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Because Evie doesn't even like finishing.
Evie doesn't like desserts. It's crazy. She literally will take like a bite or 2.
Yep.
And then she says, I'm done. She just doesn't love sugar. And so there's every once in a while where she surprises us. But like at your sister Val's birthday party, this is just the kid she is. She came up to the table. We were all singing, cut the cake, got the ice cream on a plate, handed it to Evie. And she's like, yucky cake, yucky ice cream. She doesn't like it. Like she literally doesn't like desserts. And then later when it was bedtime, she was like, she was just complaining about the dessert and how she didn't like it.
It's
it was
incredible.
Yucky. And so
it's like a parent's dream, as we're, like a kid who doesn't like sugar. And
have a kid who loves sugar and a kid who doesn't like it. And so Evie will go and opt out for, she'll eat like her body weight and berries and anything like that.
Vegetables.
Veggies. She loves almost any food. And so that's great. But then we have the other side where, we have to kind of pull her back in. Anyhow, but on that, with our eating, I feel like we can go out to eat, enjoy a nice meal, but there's always that side of me that's thinking about how much we spent, the dollar amount.
Yeah.
And I need to learn to like enjoy things and not just see a dollar sign above it.
Yeah. So, okay, that kind of gets to the issue. And money is one of these things that we have to deal with every single day. And so as Christians, trying to think through and process it, then we go to the Bible and we see money's at play in Scripture. Like if you look at even throughout the Old Testament and you look at these kings who had wealth and you look at Solomon, who, by the way, was his net value, I think, was around $2.2 trillion. And so you look at Elon Musk, who's like 347 billion or something, is like 16% of King Solomon's net value, which when you look at Scripture and God says, you will be the richest king who's ever lived and the richest king who will ever live. When you calculate the amount of wealth he had in today's money, he absolutely remains the richest. And so you see these rich kings, you see wealth, you see it talked about often. Jesus came to earth and talked about money a lot. And it's a controversial subject because we have to deal with it every day. And it can be a subject that causes a lot of tension. So that's something actually talking to like couples who are pursuing marriage, which is it's that needs to be a conversation in premarital. How do you both perceive money?
Yeah, it's huge. I think for us, we talk about it often. And, there are times where we need to budget harder. And then other times where maybe you feel a little more flexible with whatever season of life you're in, or it's interesting. And there can be conflict around that because I feel like if you aren't on the same page, or if you're not able to come to a conclusion of like how you want to spend, then it can cause tension.
Right.
And so I think that that's something that we've sought to like talk about whenever there are times where we're trying to be more tight, then it can be difficult to like want to stay inside a budget or want to be careful about your spending. Maybe one person wants to spend more, the other person's like concerned about the finances, and it's tough. It's tough to work through that. But I think I wanted to ask you too, because I know that there are a lot of misconceptions about Christians spending money. And at what point is it sinful for you to spend money on something that you enjoy instead of just like, okay, let's give away all of our money to, like a nonprofit, or give it away to a poor person who is in desperate need? At what point is it okay for you to save money, to provide for your family? And we know there are verses about that. So let's get into it. Let's talk about that.
I'm looking up a text here in scripture. My internet's not working. I can't remember the exact reference. When you were saying that, it made me think of the woman who comes and pours the expensive alabaster oil on Jesus' feet. And the Pharisees get really upset because they're like, hey, that could have been sold and given to the poor. And Jesus sees it as an act of worship, and he sees it as appropriate that she's spending money on worshiping him. She's literally pouring out expensive oil to honor him. And so, there's a lot of question around that. I would think initially there's some groundwork that needs to be laid. And as Christians, we need to understand this, that everything in itself is given to us to be enjoyed. Like God has created this world for our enjoyment. And as we enjoy it, we honor him. Now, that doesn't mean we use it and exploit it selfishly, but money in itself, it's either going to be used for good or for evil. But in itself, money is not like this wicked thing. It simply is money, and it has a place and it has a purpose. And so as Christians, we need to think through very intentionally, okay, how do we use that to glorify him? But it's interesting, Ginge, for years, I had a sort of thinking, and you and I, in our early start of our marriage, might have kind of thought along this way, which I would call kind of pietistic, where you become actually more holy if you give away more stuff, and you're gonna, like true, real, strong Christians are gonna just get rid of all of their physical possessions and give away all their money, and they're not gonna have a savings account. They're not gonna, because that would be a lack of faith. They're not trusting God with tomorrow. So they have to get rid of a savings account. They're not going to have health insurance. They're not going to have things that, are carnal means of, what would you say, like protection or
that provision, like providing for your family and like that safety net.
Yeah, safety net.
Having it around you.
Like that would be a carnal way of thinking, they'd say, because you're leaning on money to provide instead of God. Well, I think that's such a misguided understanding of the world, because God is the one who provides money, and God is the one who gives us responsibility to use it well.
And there are verses about responsibility too. Absolutely, in that, because there's a verse that says, like if a man doesn't provide for his own, he's,
worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah. But then there's also another verse that says, like, if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat.
Right. He's not willing to work.
There are those, if he's not willing to work, because there's that side, like some people can't work, but there's that side of where if you're just being lazy, just because you don't want to and you're able to, that's a problem as well. And so there are so many issues that come up where we see that. And then also when it comes to like the Bereans, there were losing their wealth. I'm trying to remember, see my brain right now.
Bereans, the Macedonians.
Because they were not increasing in wealth, but the more poverty that came upon them, the more they gave. And so in that scenario, you see that there is a self-sacrificial kind of giving that we must have. And it's one where we're not just thinking only of ourselves, like, this is my money. I've gained this. Yeah. And so I've accomplished this goal of like making myself comfortable, and now I'm not even caring for those around me.
Yeah, so it's seeing money as a means to an end. And that means to an end might be the enjoyment of God's creation. So it means, hey, God's allowed us to have expendable income that we can spend to go to Knott's Berry Farm with our family. So let's go have a great day with Jana and Steven and Ben and Jess and their kids, and bring our kids and have a wonderful day out at Knott's Berry Farm. Well, that's a means to it. That money provided that means of enjoying family, enjoying fun. But money's also the means to an end of providing for the needs of others. And so what you were referencing is 2 Corinthians 8, where Paul says, hey, let me tell you about the churches in Macedonia where they grew in poverty, and at the same time that they were becoming more impoverished, they were giving more and more to the needs in Jerusalem, because the Christians in Jerusalem were suffering. They were impoverished, they were poor, they were suffering, they were being persecuted. And so Paul's taking collections to try to help them. And the Macedonians are just giving above their means. Like they're just giving and giving and giving, even though they're struggling too.
Yeah.
And it's because Paul says this, he said, they begged us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. They gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God to us. They wanted to be generous. They wanted to take part in what God was doing to provide for their fellow brothers and sisters who were suffering. And so they saw their money as a means to an end. What's the end? Well, helping their fellow Christians. So if you see money as a means to an end, the question becomes, what's your end? Mm-hmm. And that's the real challenge for Christians is, what is your money often reveals your end, but what are you living for? Mm-hmm. And for so many, the reason they're obsessed with money and gaining it and having more is because what they're living for demands it. Mm. And it's greater ease, greater comfort, greater luxury, greater prestige, or,
Yeah, I think that's the challenge, is because what is your heart motivation behind what you're doing? Because it's not bad to own, if you have, a lot of money, to own nice things. So you can have a nice house, you can have a nice car, you can enjoy those things. Those are gifts. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you're putting your identity in those things, as in trying to flaunt your wealth, feel like, look at what I have, I can afford all these amazing things, then if that's the goal and that's the heart behind it, the Lord looks on the heart. And so I think that's something often that, as Christians, it's hard to navigate, because you have the reality of those around you who need food, shelter. They need to hear the gospel. That's a priority. And so if you can give to those things and you're able to, we are called to give generously. Yeah. And at the same time, there's also that balance of realizing, okay, well, you also can enjoy those gifts that God's given. And it's something that each person has to pray through. Yeah. You have to make those decisions in a heart of, honoring the Lord with it. Yeah. And at the same time, you need to be able to enjoy it as well.
So you're saying exactly what Paul says. And listen to this. This is 2 Timothy 6. I think a lot of people don't realize that some of these Bible passages exist, which is cool. And actually, there's one I want to get to, which is crazy. But 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul says, and this is exactly what you just said about what's your heart? As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be arrogant, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. Mm-hmm. So he says to the rich, he doesn't say what I think some people who are stuck in religious systems might expect him to say, which is, as for the rich in this present age, give it all away. Get rid of your money. He doesn't say that. Nor does he say what the health, wealth, and prosperity guys are going to say, which is just acquire more and more and more and more and more. Get as much as possible. This is a sign of God's blessing. He approaches it kind of like laissez-faire, and Timothy, tell the rich. So you have rich people in your church. Well, tell them, don't trust in their riches because it's uncertain. Be generous and use your money in a way that'll store up a foundation for that which is truly life, which is eternity. So use your money strategically, knowing that this money passes quickly and it's not you can't take it with you when you die. but you can actually use it in ways that you can take with you when you die. Meaning you can be generous and you can be kind and you can use it to advance the gospel and advance the kingdom of God. Now that you do take with you into eternity. So use your money that way.
Yeah, that is really helpful, because I think that we can so often, like I said, as Christians, put it in a box, like how we're supposed to be. And this is so helpful. That text, I remember memorizing that
in the King
years
James?
ago in the King James.
How would you say it in the King James? Do you remember?
So my King James is probably pretty bad now. But anyhow, I think that is so helpful, because we need to have a perspective that God does on money. And it's interesting because I think about money in this way. Like I didn't come from a wealthy home to start. So my grandma, I remember, this is a story that has always been kind of like etched in my mind. There were times where our family prayed for things that we needed and God provided because we didn't have the money for it.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to be in that place where you're so dependent on the Lord to provide for your daily needs. And my grandma, this is a great story just of when you're in a place of even that material need, how the Lord provides. She was trying to make it, and she was always very frugal and very disciplined, diligent. They had a used car business, and she had a real estate license, trying to provide for the family. And my grandpa was in and out of the ability to provide at times, and how he chose to spend his money. And so my grandma, being the godly woman that she was, there was a time where they got down to where they only had, it was like a canning jar of rice on the table, and it was a decoration. And when it came down to it, she was going to try to feed her 2 kids and herself. And she said that night, she sat my dad down and his sister and just said, we need to pray and ask God to provide. And they prayed and asked the Lord to provide. And the next morning, there were groceries on their doorstep. And they didn't know where they came from. But God provided for that need. And God doesn't always operate like that. There are times where you need to go and, go to a food bank or go find food. It's not like he's always going to miraculously provide in that way. But it was an incredible picture of just how he does hear our prayers and he does provide for those needs. And then there were other times where, my family, we prayed for things. One of my sisters prayed that she could have, I think it was a pink blanket. It was Jill. And she really, really wanted a pink blanket. But there was a season of time where it wasn't easy just to go out and buy what your kid wanted. And so my parents asked her to just pray. And my dad, I think he was hauling in maybe a repo car. And in the backseat of that car was a really beautiful pink blanket. And it was, in great condition. So they were able to get that for Jill. So things like that God has provided for that specific need in that specific time. It's just beautiful to see. So sometimes we think that having all the money is the answer and it's going to provide us that comfort. But sometimes you can become too comfortable. And then you don't ask God for those basic needs. And so there's a beauty in that. And I see how easy it is to forget those things, and that reliance upon the Lord, and also just the beauty and thanksgiving that we should have for whatever we have, whether we have a lot or we have a little. We need to have that constant reliance on God and that thanksgiving, and thanking him for what he's given us, but then also looking to bless others around us.
Okay, so I've got my Bible here, so that's why I'm going to keep going back to it.
I love it.
Because everything you're saying, you just told that story of your grandma, and then you said, sometimes we need those moments of reliance. And listen to this. This is Deuteronomy chapter 8. And God actually says to Israel, he says, take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, speaking of arrogance, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And so he says, hey, be careful that when you've gotten all of this prosperity, you begin to neglect the Lord, and your heart gets haughty. And so that's why he says in 1 Timothy chapter 5, as for the rich in this present age, I charge them, don't be arrogant, don't be haughty. He uses the same word in Greek. And then says, don't trust in your riches, but be generous. But he doesn't say like, hey, stop being rich. You know, it's funny, if you look at, there's even points strategically, the Apostle Paul in Acts 16, when he was seeking to accelerate the gospel and he wanted it to go across the globe, he found a woman in Lystra named Lydia, and she was rich. She was a seller of garments. And so he said, great, can we have church at your house? Because this woman had a large house and she was financially successful. Well, it was a great place for the church to begin. Okay, I want to read this. This is from Luke 16, and Jesus says something shocking about money. And I don't think a lot of people have read this, or maybe they don't remember it, or know what Jesus is saying. But listen to what Jesus says. He says to his disciples, this is the start of Luke 16, and he tells us a parable, which is a story, but it's not a real story. He's just using like examples to make a teaching. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. So the rich man called and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. And then he goes through others, and he gives them a discount on their debt. And so the manager hears this and commends the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Or the rich man, hears this and commends the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. And then Jesus says, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. And people go, wait, what? Like usually when Jesus tells a parable, he has like a good guy and a bad guy. Here, he's got a rich guy who's getting robbed. And then he actually says the guy robbing him, the manager, was shrewd because he sold off his manager's debts at half the price so that those people would provide for him when he's fired. And then Jesus looks at that guy and says, you guys aren't even as shrewd as that, speaking to his disciples. And people get really confused by that.
Yeah.
Because they're like, Jesus, are you telling us to be like robbers? Like, are you telling us to like rip off our bosses? Like, what are you telling us to do? But listen to what he says. He says, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, he's talking about money, make friends, use your money in such a way, shrewdly, so that when it fails, when the money no longer applies, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Meaning the people you're spending your money on, building friendships with, are going to be with you in heaven, so that when you are received into their eternal homes. What is Jesus saying? He's saying this: use your money in a savvy way, cleverly, be wise in advancing what's truly important. So if you look at the world and people, how people in the world who don't regard God use their money, they're using it all for their self gain, their own desires, their own. And he's saying they are so clever in how they get more money, how they manage their stock portfolios, all just to gain earthly treasure. So why aren't you being just as savvy with your money in order to advance eternal treasure? So it shows you the end goal for the follower of Jesus is eternal. And that's going to affect how we use our money. It's going to affect how we use our time as well. It's going to affect how we use our words and our minds, right?
100%.
And our creativity and our energy, because our end goal is different.
Yeah.
And so the money conversation comes down to not the piece of, gold itself, comes down to your end game. And if your end game is the glory of God and eternal in treasure, which means you're storing up for yourselves treasures by loving others, being generous, caring for the poor, serving in the body of Christ, advancing the gospel, like all this. Well, the way you use money, but not just money, but your time, your energy, your words, is all going to drive that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. I think that is very, very helpful, because there are so many people who just we can struggle with that. Like, we can think that, yeah, investing money or energy into something, this is another thing. Like what we do for a job.
Mm-hmm.
People can think that it's so, Christians will often get so wrapped up in, okay, well, ministry it's inside these boxes. And so I have to be in full-time ministry to glorify God. I
really
can't
count.
actually I can't be a doctor, or I can't work in accounting. I can't be a janitor, or whatever it is, because I'm not actually, how am I contributing to the body of Christ? And what eternal good is that? And at the same time, those are all things that God has created, and there are ways that you are glorifying God by making that money. Then you can give generously, or by even being present, like as a school teacher, you're making a difference in those kids' lives. And just by being faithful in the everyday tasks that God has put before you is a way that you're glorifying God. And I think that's something that we often forget.
Right. Yeah, it's good. It makes us, it causes us to recalibrate and to think and to be intentional. Like, even as you're talking, I'm thinking about, okay, I need to really be thoughtful in how I'm spending the resources God gives, whether it's time, energy, words. Like, those are all resources. So I would hope that people would expand their understanding of resource and not just think money, but be thinking, well, it's also your mind. It's also your energy. It's your time. It's your possessions. How are you using those? And how you're using those will ultimately reveal where your treasure is. And so for the Christian, that doesn't mean, well, eternal treasure means I can't take my children to a sporting event to have fun. Mm-hmm. Well, no, that's absolutely advancing eternal priority, because you're investing in your kids and you're honoring God by enjoying the good gifts he gives. And so each person needs to think through, how can I use what God's given me for his glory and the good of others? And that includes, giving to advance the cause of Christ. Mm-hmm. You look at those Macedonians, they were giving to other Christians who were really struggling.
Yeah. And I love how you talked about the time, energy, your resources, because I think that we can often think about giving generously in a way like money is the only way.
Only? Yeah.
And that is just not the case. Yeah. Working in college ministry, with that, and there are students around, and, a lot of them are just in a season of life where they are just getting started, living on their own. And in LA, it's so expensive. And so you have so many students who are serving so selflessly, giving sacrificially, and they are just an example to me, even in the way that they serve. So they're going to show up first at church, serve donuts. They're going to go out in the community and help others. They're going to be serving at Children's Hunger Fund and, packing food boxes from donations that come in. It's really encouraging to see that, because you don't have to have a lot to serve. And I think that that's something that, we need to be reminded of.
Yeah. There's more ways to be generous than just writing a check. And some of the most generous people we know are not wealthy.
Yeah.
And so that's aspirational for us as we think about that. Man, there's a lot more to talk about with money. People get real critical and about money. And at the end of the day, it does come down to, what's your end game? Mm-hmm. And what are you using this for? And it's interesting, James, the half-brother of Jesus, speaks to the wicked wealthy in James 5, who were abusing the poor for their own gain, which we see all over the place in our world today. And he says something fascinating. He says, you have gained for yourself treasure on earth. Mm-hmm. And when he says on earth, it hits like a sledgehammer, because James is thinking beyond this temporal life. He's thinking beyond the few years you spend here. And so he looks at the rich who've abused and stripped the poor of their money. And he says, great, you're rich on the earth, but that's all you've got.
Mm-hmm.
True riches is life after death.
Yeah.
So that should define how we approach it.
So
Okay,
good.
we've got to go relieve our babysitter.
Yes.
Good topic, fun topic. Maybe we'll revisit it on some other things. Would be interested to hear your thoughts, listeners, on the whole topic of money. And if there's any questions or things to explore there, there's so many ways to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure we'll be revisiting that topic soon. But
yeah.
Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully that was encouraging. We're grateful for you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.